All right. So welcome everybody to the 2004 ISEP Board Town Hall meeting. We're so glad to have you here. Today we're doing a slightly different format. Your colleagues Dimeji, Togunde, and Anne-Charlotte Larsson are going to interview John Lucas for the first 30 minutes or so of our time together. And then you will have the opportunity to ask questions of John at the end of this presentation discussion. I will be monitoring chat in case you want to drop a question in there for later. And if I miss you for any reason, please shout out my name and I will respond to you as well. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce somebody I hope you all know, our fearless leader, John Lucas, who is president and CEO of ISEP Study Abroad since January 16, 2016. That means he's just completed 8 years of service with us and is into his third month of his 9th year. Anne-Charlotte Larsson is joining us from Sweden, and she is the Vice Rector for Innovation and International Relations at Linnaeus University. Welcome, Anne-Charlotte.
Thank you.
And we're also joined by your colleague, Dimeji Togunde, Vice Provost for Global Education and Professor of International Studies at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. Thank you both so much for agreeing to be part of this activity. And John, I wonder if you would like to say a few words before we get started with the questions from Anne-Charlotte and Dimeji.
Just very briefly to welcome everybody and say we look forward to your feedback. We thought this would be a little bit more conversational than having a PowerPoint. I do know what our colleagues are going to ask, and I have a few notes, but I don't have a prepared text. So I hope is that this will be a bit more conversational of an update for those of you who are not seeing me on the road every day. At conferences and so on. So welcome everybody and thank you all for joining and for participating.
Thank you, John. So without further ado, I would like to invite Anne-Charlotte to ask the first question.
Well, John, when we don't meet you in conferences and other places, and we are a little further away from ISEP as an organization, what highlights would you like to share with us since the November meeting? You know, we meet in November and then we have the next meeting in May, but a lot of things happen in between. So.
There has been a lot of activity going on, and I'll talk a little about what I've been up to, although I'm one of 40 people, and the team has certainly been really engaged as well. I spoke to Bill in January, our board chair, about my personal goals for the year, and now that we have Robin Abbott on as our capable VP of Finance, and she has also agreed to supervise HR, and we have our COO, we have Edson, who's also agreed to take on IT. Most of the operational aspects of ISEP now are in capable hands, and I really wanted to lean into this idea of working in partnership with Kristen and others to be a more visible, externally focused president for ISEP, to raise the visibility and profile of the organization externally. And boy, have I done that since January. I think I've counted since our board meeting 5 speaking engagements, 5 conferences, 3 countries, about 3 or 4 site visits, and 5 different member institutions. So I've been busy. And so what is all of that activity for? I would say, to summarize, and then I'll tell you what some of the activities were, to raise ISEP's visibility as a thought leader and strategic partner in the field, especially outside the US, to visit some of our existing members and try to reignite mobility where it's stuck, and to try to explore some new opportunities and new programs for ISEP to bring back to the team. So some of those, and I'll try to be as brief as I can, but this question is the one that's the hardest to summarize because it's really been an exciting, busy few months. right after the forum board meeting, as you know, I'm the chair of the Forum on Education Abroad. This is the organization that sets standards for student mobility in the United States. They had their first ever European Institute in Strasbourg. They also are trying to be more externally focused and engaged internationally. So this was a seminar to look at climate change, mental health, and virtual learning in our field from the perspective of Europeans and those who'd lived for a long time in Europe. I was probably the least European, and I have lived in Europe for 15 years. So it was a very European focused point of view on these topics. And it was fantastic. Long form, longer sessions, and longer panels. We really got into the issues really well, about 25, 30 participants. And I was able to visit one of our members in Germany, have not visited our German members in Trier. That was interesting. I learned that our students there have access to a European Union program in English I didn't know about. I'm not sure we knew about at ISEP that also includes access to Luxembourg. They can even attend the Université de Luxembourg. So that's interesting. Then I was in Canada. I do not always attend the Canadian Bureau on International Education, but I was offered a speaking role there. And we've been really trying to, on the exchange side, we need more spots. And there's an imbalance, right? So we've been trying to bring on more Canadian exchange members. We're actually finding the colleges, more than the universities, need us. And so we have some new community college members in Canada. So I was able to engage with them, get to know them, both Red Deer College in Alberta and Conestoga College, which has been more active in Ontario. And I gave a presentation really on mobility. I mean, 90% of the Canadian conference is on inbound, and this was one of the few sessions on helping Canada get students out. I learned about some scholarship programs we might participate in as well, so that was exciting. Then, if that wasn't enough, I came back to Washington for AIEA, which is the Senior Administrators Conference in our field. We had a panel discussion with about 20 leaders that ISEP facilitated. Elaine Meyerly from our board was on that panel. We talked about, in that case, foreign policy. It was a kind of a closed door session where we really kind of let our hair down and talked as fellow leaders and colleagues about what are the challenges of this kind of increasingly complicated and fraught political climate that we all live in. And so Elaine was there, and our friend Karen Fisher from the Chronicle moderated. And so that session was exciting. And then then I went to a series of events in Spain, which is really all centered on business development. I was invited back to speak at APUNE, which is the Spanish and American Study Abroad Conference. So I gave a talk in Spanish. That was really kind of back to the future. There's a lot of concern in Spain that American providers are sending lots of students, but they don't really engage with the university. They might take one class at the university and the rest at the little American Study Center. And of course, ISEP is fully immersed where we are. So we were talking about, the new model, the innovative model for mobility is the old one. It's exchange, it's direct enrollment in Seville. So I spoke there in Spanish. Then I went to Madrid. I visited our partner universities there, the Complutense, which is one of the oldest, largest universities in Europe, but mobility's been stuck there. And so I had the opportunity to speak to, I think, 10 vice deans and 2 vice rectors. I mean, it was a very well-attended session, which tells you they want to reignite mobility. They want to work on sciences. They want more mobility in those areas. Of course, the Complutense, very large, 80,000 student university. They have lots of partners, but they need us to help with some of the sciences. And I visited Alfonso X, one of the first private universities in Spain that we've been working with for a long time. And their vice rector, their president, came down, rolled up her sleeves, and just sat and had a conversation for about an hour, which really tells you how engaged they are. And she's an AI specialist, so that's fascinating. But they're doing a new program on business and technology. They have a brand new green building downtown in Madrid. They're interested in students working with tech companies to design solutions. It's a very engaged learning kind of model. They've just started the first year, and they were interested in developing a partnership with us, with ISEP. So I had that chance, and then I just got back from the Forum on Education Abroad in Boston. So it was nice to see some of you there. Dimeji for dinner. Our colleague Keisha Abraham was helping us with our Historically Black College initiative. Elaine Meyer-Lee was there. And that was my last year as chair of the board of the forum. So it was really good to do the opening remarks, to meet some of our colleagues there and engage in the forum as well. So just a little busy. Those are the few things that I've been up to. Meanwhile, the team back home have been, shoring up a really successful semester with really strong, I think, enrollment and good success in some of our new programs. So those are just a few highlights.
Well, you sure have been busy. And that does create visibility, which I think we have all seen, both on the social media and elsewhere.
Thank you. It's been fun. It's been tiring in some ways, but also energizing in others. And yes, thank you to my colleagues who've been keeping the social media channels alive and active.
Dimeji.
Yes, John, thank you for your interesting response to Anne's question. I want to take you into a new area that you are familiar with. As you know, access, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are very critical to our work in international education. Can you speak to us about ISEP's most recent efforts in this area? How is ISEP ensuring opportunities for underserved populations and in new locations?
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about here. As you know, diversity and inclusion is a part of ISEP and who we are. It's baked into creating affordable programs, to trying to hire a diverse and multilingual group of advisors. It's baked into keeping the costs low in our programs. But you also know that in our strategic plan, we focus primarily on the historically Black colleges and universities community. And I know some board members have asked, what about Latinos? What about other groups? And what I've learned by doing this work with our HBCU members is that it takes a long time. It's relational, not transactional, and it requires a sustained commitment. And it's really difficult to do that with 3 or 4 or 5 communities at once, because we're still a small team, even though a growing team. So that's why we're focused on the HBCUs, and also because mobility kind of slowed down. We've had a half a dozen HBCU members for a long time, but after COVID in 2021, I think we only had 4 students mobilized from our HBCUs. So we've tripled that in 2023 to 15, and in 2023 to 4, it's 36 students with a goal to get to 100 soon. But what I learned, and I asked my colleagues who are working on this, what do you want the board to know? Because they just gave a presentation to the senior leadership team. It's about a 15-slide presentation. So if you're interested, I'll share it. And I said, how do I distill this? Because you've really worked hard. And they said, tell the board the most important thing we've learned is that the engagement is relational. It takes time. We have to get to know the leaders at these institutions and the students. We have to really measure not just the number of students, but how successful they are, and are the programs meeting their needs, and really adjust. We will get to a point where I think we're mobilizing significantly more students, but we need to start, I guess, really with the relational. So we've done for 2 years at NAFSA an HBCU forum, and I think Torian may be bringing some deans to our forum, and hopefully in NAFSA. Maybe, is that still a possibility?
Yes, you say 2 deans?
Some of your deans, I think you
Yeah. So
mentioned you
our
might
dean
be.
for our College of Liberal Arts and dean for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math.
That's
Definitely.
fantastic. That's fantastic. So the purpose of those forum, of the HBCU forum, is buy-in for HBCU leaders. So our consultant, Dr. Keisha Abraham from Spelman, from Dimeji's University, has been leading the effort because she knows the community. And so it's to bring content and to bring dialogue and to bring conversation. And then out of that will grow the strategic plan for growing the enrollments. And so I think that's been really important. I've heard feedback that other colleges go in and say, here's a big grant, we expect enrollments tomorrow, and that is a very abrasive approach and kind of colonial and not particularly successful. We're trying to take a more thoughtful, relationship building approach, and I think it will ultimately also lead to student engagement, we hope, and member engagement. But it's been really an effort of relationship building for the last 2 years. We've also been talking a little bit about Indigenous mobility. Another reason for that is because it's very difficult to mobilize that community. Also, one where relationships are important. We don't have those relationships, we're building them. Michael has written a small grant, which I think we're finalists for. I don't know that we know the answer yet as to whether we've won the grant. No, we don't know yet, Michael said, because I've been on the road a lot, so I have to look at him to get my cue. And he said, we don't know, but we are finalists. And the purpose of that grant would be very similar to the HBCU. If we get the money, it's to bring some of the leaders and elders from the Indigenous communities to mobilize them first, to get them engaged so that we can get to know the community, and then they can introduce us to the students. And so both of those, I think, are initiatives for diversity and inclusion that are specific to certain communities where we have not yet had as much success as we like, where we need to invest long-term and sustained on building relationships. And then I guess in conclusion, I'd say at the same time, as I said at the very beginning, just because we're focused on those two communities and building relationships doesn't mean we don't care about diversity and inclusion broadly. That's kind of baked in the cost structure, in the way we work. It's baked into a lot of the other seminars and workshops that our team does, whether it's for the LGBTQ community, different abilities. We do a lot of work on mental health, creating access there. It's just that we really double down on two communities where we need to build relationships and get better.
Well, thank you very much for this thorough explanation, John.
And I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint from our HBCU task force. They've got a lot more rich, deep, information in there than I could possibly convey in a few minutes.
That could perhaps be a seminar that we could have together, or you can say it a side activity when we meet in May, because I think that would be very valuable to all of us.
Well, it would, and Charlotte, and particularly because part of this is not just our learning about the historically Black colleges, but introducing them to some of our international partners. And Dimeji knows that the history is that historically Black colleges have been mobile for a long time, and they have connections that we don't know about. And then some of our other members at ISEP may not have those connections. So it is introducing our global community to what is an HBCU,
And then, John, there is also a dimension that is gaining momentum in the field, and that is the opportunity for some of the locations to tap into the diaspora, the Black diasporan communities in those locations to enrich learning opportunities for students. And I hope this is part of what ISEP is going to tap into.
It absolutely is, and Keisha's been teaching us about that, and I've learned, I don't come with this knowledge. I've been learning it from Keisha and from others, and absolutely tapping into the diaspora community, because that's also a way of thinking of this not as a deficit model of mobilizing students who haven't been, but it's looking at where the Black diaspora community has been successful, where immigrant communities have created jobs and communities and built relationships, and then building on success, right? So it's a much more positive way of approaching this than a deficit model, which has often happened, sadly, in our field.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Well, John, now when you have been around, you have been meeting people, both nationally and internationally. What trends do you see? I mean, it looks like we are forgetting that COVID ever existed. But what's the next thing on the global market and on the national market?
It's a good question, Anne Charlotte, and I feel like there's a push and pull here, because on the one hand, I feel like if you talk to the higher education community, it's all about collaboration and connection. So in Europe, as you well know, because this is your area, there's this whole space of European universities where consortia and collections of universities in Europe are coming together. Some of those partnerships are kind of intellectual about mobility and creating programs together, and some have actually created legal entities in Brussels, right? They're 6 or 8 universities building a consortium in Brussels. I don't know exactly where that's going. Mobility is only a small piece of it, but I did speak to, when I was in Barcelona, to my friend of mine, Lucia Conte, who leads the Utopia. She's one
Yeah.
of the leaders of the Utopia Alliance, right? And I said, what's mobility going to be like? I mean, does that mean that if ISEP is a partner with Pompeo Fabra and you're in the Utopia Alliance, that we have access to the other 9? Or, and she said, we don't know. We have no idea where these are really going to go, right? But it's a huge trend in Europe, and we're seeing it even United States. Some US universities are joining these partnerships. I'm hearing more about that from our colleagues around the world. Dual degrees, joint degrees, that's a big part of this. Collaborations like our AHIA one, where faculty are collaborating to create online mobility projects. So there's all this on the one hand that's positive about collaborate, connect, partner. And then kind of the negative side is larger forces in society that seem to be sort of pulling in the opposite direction around isolationism, nationalism, white nationalism, fear. And it feels like there is this push and pull where the higher education community is really trying to pull people together in collaboration, and the world seems to be trying to pull us apart. I mean, I would just remind everyone that, I tend to think, I think we all agree, higher education has often, in moments of political distress, been the one sector that kind of under the radar maintains connections. Or a lot of our study abroad organizations in the US were founded in post-war Europe. And we were the ones keeping the connections open. China right now, there's all kinds of political problems with China, but my colleagues who work in China say the relationships with universities, the collaboration is still very strong at an institution level, at a researcher to researcher level. So I would say those are the 2 trends that I see, this one force pulling away and another force kind of trying to pull us back together in some ways.
Yeah, I can say that I was very happy actually to find that with the consortium that we are in for European University, we had several ISEP members.
Which is your consortium?
It is UniWell, eUniWell. So both the University of
Okay.
Murcia and the University of Nantes. So that it means that we might find different ways of further collaboration. But you're quite right. We need to keep up the discussion in between ourselves and also try to keep the science diplomacy going. So I would second your trends and say that we need to work even more to work on our networks and our collaborations.
Absolutely. Well, that's good to hear, and exciting to hear that some of our members are connected. And I know I've talked to Murthy about this too. So I'll be very curious to see what do the EU alliances mean for mobility outside the EU as we go. I think it's still a chapter to be written in many ways.
And I think that you will find 50 different answers.
Yes,
so far.
Yes, so far, yeah.
So far. But then we can shape the future together.
Absolutely.
So if I may come in, John, one of the trends that is going on nationally is the shift or the increase in the number of students who are doing short-term programs. How is ISEP tapping into these opportunities, considering the length of participation that is shrinking right now to short-term programs?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because we had talked, and originally in our strategic plan, we had one of the goals was to build kind of in a way a short-term program initiative or division in ISEP, and we sort of backed away from that, discovering that a lot of the short-term trends in the United States are around faculty-led programs. They involve building travel programs around the world, and we've not really been successful at doing that, and it doesn't really fit the ISEP model of collaboration. So where we're engaging are a couple of places. I mean, our summer programs are growing really in amazing ways. I mean, they're growing, I don't know, 20-30%. Edson can probably tell me the numbers for the last couple of years, and they seem to continue to be growing. And I think that's an area where we can be successful because it fits our values and affordability and access and direct enrollment and connection to the local cultures, immersion. So I think that's one area. The project Kristen's been working on AHIA, which I think still is in its infancy, if you were to ask me, and yet we have 4 or 5 cohorts and lots of faculty involved. I think there's still a lot to do there. We don't even know yet where it might go, but that's where faculty meet one-on-one, and then they do a collaboration online. And those are typically short-term as well. And those are the two places we've really leaned in. But we have not gone in the direction, and this is partly the staff saying to me, it doesn't really fit ISEP's culture, and we don't think we can be successful in really leading faculty-led short-term programs. So we've sort of tried to find other ways through summer, through our connection with AHIA online, and some new program ideas that are coming forward on, we hope, on internships and other engaged learning or community-based learning that our program development team is still working on, and I think remain to be seen. Some of those I think will begin, from what I understand, will probably also start in summer or in January term as short-term programs.
So I'm going to
helps.
pivot. Thank you, John.
Mhm.
I'm going to pivot right now. So what are you excited about as you look forward to the 2024-2025 year and beyond?
Well, I'm super excited that we're growing again, and there is renewed interest in ISEP in our programs and from our members. We just talked about, you said short-term programs. We're rethinking what that means for ISEP. I told you about, Spain, all of these new development ideas. I mentioned briefly that our program development team is working on some engaged learning. We have, I don't know, 5 years worth of program development ideas floating around ISEP. Whether we do all of them, we probably won't, right? But there's so much out there in terms of opportunity that I'm excited. And I can't tell you, as the president of ISEP, I can't look ahead and say which ones I think will be the most successful yet. And which ones I think might fall by the wayside. What I can say is, out of all of this energy, some new ideas are going to emerge, and they're going to take us in slightly different directions. And that, to me, is really exciting.
Great. And
How do we manage to keep the fees down so that we are competitive? I mean, we want to engage and we want to include students from all backgrounds. So everywhere we talk about inflation and higher costs. So how do we manage, and what can we do to stay competitive?
Right. This is that pull and push, right? Again, So a couple of things. The program development team is supposed to be monitoring this. And one of the ways they do that, I know they've just finished and I haven't even had time to see it, is a competitive analysis. So Cynthia in the program development team is working on a very deep competitive analysis, because we have said we want to be affordable. That doesn't mean the cheapest program. It doesn't mean the most expensive, somewhere in the affordable range, because we want to provide good services as well. And so she's monitoring that to make sure. And as you know, we repriced our programs recently to keep them down. We went through a whole process to reduce our fees with our student insurance, for example, trying to find better insurance at a better price. So some of those efforts, keeping our eyes on the market, I think will help. And we've created some new program models. The summer programs inherently are more affordable, and we really worked hard to pare down. We had a very expensive summer portfolio, and we've cut that down to a smaller portfolio of more affordable programs. So I think that has been another way we've tried to cut costs. That goes against, of course, the members every year saying we want more. We need more technology, more faculty engagement, more, more visibility from the ISEP team visiting on campus. They say they really value the campus visits and the one-on-one support we provide. So it's a push and pull of trying to find ways to keep the program cost as low as possible, but also add more services. And I don't know, there's a magic answer to that.
Probably not, because it will be different in different countries. But from us members, is there anything we can do in our different universities, in our different countries? Any suggestions from you?
Well, I mean, one thing is using ISEP more and more, and I know that might sound self-interested, use ISEP more, that's great. But because it is a community-based kind of organization, particularly the exchange model, which we know doesn't grow as much, the more that people use it and create opportunities in the exchange model, that guarantees its health. It guarantees that it doesn't rely so much on the other programs to support it. And so anything we can do to encourage or improve the affordability of the exchange model simply by using it, right? And giving more opportunities, that creates affordability for the students who need it. And it takes the pressure off some of the other programs, like our ISEP Direct programs, which are growing. But if they don't have as much pressure to support the exchange, then we don't have as much need to increase the cost so quickly, right?
Yeah.
So I think just everything you can do to use and encourage people, to your colleagues, to use the model, it actually benefits everybody. That's the interesting thing about the exchange model. It is very self-sustaining. The more you use it, the more affordable it becomes, right?
That is that's a good suggestion to us, because it's very easy to look upon somebody else to solve all your problems, but it's also what we can do together that is going to help our students and give the best for our student population. So
Yeah,
thanks,
absolutely.
that's good advice. That is something we should then encourage all of the members, not only of the executive board and of the council of advisors, but also all of the members.
Yes, thank
John?
you.
Hey, John, you've certainly been an effective leader and as a champion of ISEP's global ideas. We've seen remarkable success in your tenure, and the board has been very supportive of your agenda because of the evidence that is clearly seen in the direction you are taking the organization. What challenges do you have? What keeps you awake at night?
Lots of things, unfortunately, the world keeps me awake at night, as it probably does all of you. And I could say, I was just saying to Anne Charlotte that we saw the Scandinavian countries are on the high happiness index. And one of the things that makes you happy is not reading too much social media. And I think that's probably good advice, you know, because we can't change those things.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of things underneath that worry me a little bit. One is, as we grow, we have to, and you said this, Anne Charlotte, about keeping costs down. As we grow, we have to reinvest in ISEP, and we're becoming more specialized, right? We have to have now we have program development. We didn't have a program development team when I got here. We didn't really have much of a marketing and communications team when I got here. I think we had one person. We didn't really have curriculum integration. That's an area. We didn't have a task force on diversity, equity, and inclusion, our ideas task force. We didn't spend time on those things. And so all of those things are new and they require investments. You have to invest. But you don't want to invest so much so fast that you get ahead of yourself, and then you create a cost structure you can't afford. And so that keeps me up at night, sort of thinking, I don't want to starve the organization. I want to feed it. At the same time, I don't want it to grow too fast that the costs get ahead of themselves. So that one is one that's always a delicate balance. And I said this one to Edson and to Robin the other day, as we have more activity in ISEP Direct, we logically have more exposure to foreign currencies. When I got here, maybe it was $3 or $4 million that we did in foreign currency. Now it's 9 million in next year's budget. If you miss those foreign currency projections by 2 or 3%, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So the stakes for some of the things that are hidden, I call them the icebergs, the things under the water, the stakes of those things are much higher than they were when I got here and we were smaller. And so those things keep me up at night a little bit too.
Colleen?
And we know how fast things can change, like when we had the hit of the pandemic. Right now, we are in a much better situation, but growing too fast could also be an issue. Sorry, Dimeji.
That's okay.
Yeah. Anything else on that point? I will say we are reinvesting some of our growth in the investment portfolio, and we are watching carefully to make sure that our reserve fund continues to grow proportionately to the cost of running the program, so that if we do hit one of those little icebergs, hopefully it will be a little bump and not a major bump.
Then we think you sleep quite well.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right. Thank you, John and Charlotte and Dimeji, for a very interesting question and answer situation here for our town hall meeting. Now is the time we would like to open it up to everyone here on the call for you to ask John your questions. If you want to raise your hand digitally, I can call on you. If you prefer to drop your question into the chat, I can read it for John. But this is your opportunity to let us know what is on your mind. What is keeping you awake at night? Yes, Larry.
John, you referenced sort of at a high level, political winds around the world. And I'm wondering, obviously, I mean, sitting in the States, I'm, pretty attuned to what's happening here. What I'm curious about is abroad in your travels, are you seeing higher ed abroad facing different challenges than what higher ed is facing here? So as an example, the whole debate around the ROI on higher ed here has gotten extreme because of the cost of college education, be it private, public, or whatever. I suspect that's probably less of an issue in a lot of countries around the world, but there may be other issues where government officials or pundits or whatever are really calling into question the value of higher ed overseas. And any thoughts around that?
Yeah.
Please.
It's definitely different in different places. I mean, I think this kind of fear of right-wing backlash, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, that kind of thing, that's everywhere. I mean, I think in Europe, the debate is fairly settled, and my European colleagues can say if I'm wrong. I know Europe isn't a monolith, but education is the public good. And I think I can say that pretty confidently around Europe, whether one party or the other is in power in whichever parliament you're talking about. Generally speaking, education is the public good. Now, they have different policies around it, but that question is settled. And I think it's obviously an open question in the United States. Is it a public good? And then I think sadly, some governments would say, is it any good in the United States, right? We're starting to see higher ed questioned at the core in certain parts of this country. Ironically, from people who mostly hold higher education degrees themselves, which I always find ironic. It's very easy to be a governor of a state and say, no, higher education isn't useful, you shouldn't have it, and that person has an Ivy League education. It's fascinating to me how the hubris of all of that. But in any case, I do see there are places, so like Korea, for example, there is strong government control over enrollment caps. And so if you talk to Dr. KJ Lee, our board member, your colleague at Hanyang University, their struggle is they can't grow because there's a collective approach to how enrollments are managed. And so if your university needs to grow because costs are growing, but you hit your cap, what are you going to do? And we do struggle. We see it at ISEP because there are certain universities, and Kristen and Michael and Edson will shake their heads here, where we don't have enough space. Getting international students in is difficult, and that in part is because they have trouble growing, creating more opportunities. They're limited in how many they can take because there's kind of a centralized approach. So that's very different to Europe. Japan is a little bit different. They're really investing in trying to get more English, because they recognize getting their students out, they don't have the English language capability that, say, Koreans do. And we see that too. We struggle to get the Japanese in, and they are investing a lot at a national level. And the last thing I'll say is NAFSA makes this point, and it's true, the United States is the last of the major destinations for inbound study abroad that does not have a national strategy for international education, which is shocking. Canada has one, Britain has one, Swedes have a national, everybody has a national strategy. We don't. And so that's, I think, creating a real problem when our partners don't know who to talk to in the State Department. And I've had people ask me, is that the State Department? Is that the Ed Department? Is that the local government? What do I, and it makes it really hard for us to partner effectively because we have just a disjointed, disconnected approach to this in our country.
Thank you, John and Larry. Madeline, you had your hand up. Do you have a
Yeah,
question for
I
John?
do. I'm going back to what you said about Canada and the interest in the community colleges. did I understand you correctly? Um, to my knowledge, we've never had any US community college members. And is this going to be an issue having Canadian community colleges and not US community colleges, which may raise the question, why not US community colleges?
Really good question, and maybe and Ellen may help out here a little bit, being a resident Canadian. But so in Canada, they use the word college, and college means roughly community college in the United States parlance, except when it doesn't. That's the way that I would say it. And by that I mean that their colleges in Canada embrace some of the shorter term 2 years, some of the more practical career focused education, but they also span to 4-year degrees in many cases. So they're in an interesting liminal space somehow between college and between community college and between university. And I think they can be more attractive. We've not yet had inbound students to them yet, but when I looked at their degree programs, they've got enough 4-year degrees in there that I think it would work. On the outbound side, they are often private, they've got more resources, and they're starting with summer programs and short-term and on the ISEP Direct model. And if you'd asked me when I went to Canada if I ever thought Canadians would send out on ISEP Direct, I would have said, no, that's probably not the direction. I suspect it's only going to be on exchange. And curiously enough, some of the first 2 new partnerships we created were with these colleges or community colleges. And so now, Ellen, you can tell me what I got wrong in that.
No, I'm more familiar with the model in Quebec than you're in Ontario and British Columbia, and of course in education, it's all by province in Canada. So not that familiar. All I could say though is the exchange is so significant in Canada. Madeline, you and John, you were there more recently, but I think it's almost 25 cents on the dollar, or maybe not that high today. So I didn't know the impact of that on what the students will pay for these programs.
It does, and that's why the shorter term mobility, is kind of been the way to go. I would have thought the exchange would be popular, but it also takes time to really build those relationships. And a lot of colleges in Canada, a lot of universities have pre-existing agreements. As you said, in Quebec, it's very hard to get in because they have long-term, deep relationships with France already. And so even going in, trying to speaking in French, I've gone to the sessions in French and speak, in French. It's hard because they already have those relationships, and it's difficult to find a space for ISEP. I think we have a little bit more of an opening in British Columbia and Ontario, although I would love to have a French-speaking university from New Brunswick or Quebec, probably be the most likely, right? But we've not yet been successful. And I think it's because they do have pre-existing exchange relationships. Yeah, as Kristen said, the 2 that have joined recently are affiliates, and they're sending primarily on direct. And that's Conestoga College in Ontario, our first one in Ontario, and I believe Red Deer is Alberta, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Madeline and John. Are there other questions for John today? What did he say that's making you start to think about something that you'd like additional clarification on, for example? Well,
I'll ask another question if I may. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing with enrollments for the summer and next year, applications, and how does it look?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I did read the
Yeah.
report just before I got
Yeah.
on, and the summer is
Just in
going
general.
gangbusters. Yeah,
Oh,
in
okay.
general, the summer is gangbusters, right? It's growing by leaps and bounds and very, very strong. ISEP Direct looks like it continues to grow, not quite as fast as it has been the last couple of years, but we're getting, close to meeting our budget numbers for the fall. And exchange, great news on exchange, because we've had such a hard time getting that to grow as fast as direct. But it does look like there was Ed said, I want to say 5 or 6% growth. Something, Kristen?
Yep,
something
exactly
like that
right.
Okay.
5%.
I didn't know if I remembered it, 5% growth. So that's fantastic. So So yeah, I think the initial push that we did, lowering the cost, creating a new portfolio, that really got a huge boost for 2 summers. And then but the growth seems to be continuing in summer, and then with the semesters, it's growing, but I don't think we can get those 30% growth every year, you know, that we had. That said, it seems like the engine of growth still has some momentum. Was that fair to say, Kristen and Edson?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the only thing I'll add to that is, our new program in Florence, which will be hosting students for the first time this fall, is a nice driver of that growth. We're a little early to say on numbers, but we may be looking at 30 students there in its very first semester, which will make it a top 5 program for ISEP, and projected out over the year, $750,000 in revenue on the top line, a couple $100,000 in margin. So, I mean, it's looking like a huge success for new program and new growth for the organization that we can fund other initiatives. So yeah, exciting, very exciting.
Yeah. And one unasked question, but it kind of begs the question, how are we continuing to be ISEP? Some people have said to me, oh, well, you're in a big place. There's lots of students in places like Florence and Barcelona. How do you do it differently? And it's direct enroll. I mean, all of these programs in Florence are large US study centers, largely taught by faculty hired by Americans in an American space. This will be at Florence University of the Arts. It will be fully direct enroll, just like it always is. With ISEP. So that's quite unique in a place that has so many students. I don't think anybody else has direct enroll 100% that I know of in Florence. They're almost all study center programs. So cost-wise, engaged learning-wise, I think it'll be a still on brand very much. And it's exciting to see that normally it takes us a year or so for new programs to really consolidate, but occasionally you hit one where it kind of grows really quickly.
So we have time for one more question. Anybody else have a question for John? No? All right, well then I want to thank everybody. Oh, Jeannie
Yeah,
has
Jeannie.
raised her hand.
Maybe
Please.
on the personal side, John, tell us a little bit more about your about where you learned Spanish and how you're connected to the Latin American or Hispanic culture and the world.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one and a fun one. I grew up in Kansas, right? It's landlocked there. I mean, you could drive 6 hours and 8 hours in any direction, and you'd still be in the Midwest and largely this similar accent. But I had neighbors who were Cuban, and that was kind of a window on the world. And I would go and speak to them. I like older folks. I tend to relate well to grandparents. And the family next door, they were doctors. Both of them were really successful young gynecologists, and the grandmother was at home alone and she didn't speak English. And so I would go and kind of tutor her and she would tutor me. And it became this kind of window on the world, and I got invited to Latin American, parties or events and things. And I just thought this was amazing and fascinating. And I had to learn the language back then, right? Because I have gray hair. We didn't have the internet. So I would go down to the Latino section of Kansas City. I'm in Kansas City now, actually, on Southwest Boulevard, where you would get cassette tapes. There was like one little store that sold cassette tapes, and you would have to get the cassette tapes. And it was mostly ranchera music. And it wasn't necessarily the most modern pop music, didn't quite get here. And I would listen to that, and I would take notes, and I would look up in a dictionary, because that's what you did back then, right? And I would learn, through these songs, and then I would go and get ideas from my neighbors as to what music I should be listening to and which cassette tapes I should be getting. And so and then I went to Spain. I started out in Latin American studies and ended up in Spain because that's where my Rotary scholarship came from. And so and the rest is kind of history. I sort of fell in love with the idea. Don Quixote said in the Quixote, which is amazing. Cervantes has this wonderful paragraph where he says, learning a foreign language is like looking at a tapestry from the back. If you look at a tapestry in one of the museums, if you look at it from the backside, you can kind of sort of see what's going on, but not quite really. And then when you flip the tapestry around, it's like, oh, all of a sudden you see the image clearly. That feeling when you learn another language well enough that it clicks and you're like, oh, I get it. I understand what they were saying. It's exhilarating, and that's what's kind of always drove me in the language learning. And why I still love it. I always say in my retirement, what I'd love to do is just sit around and learn languages. That's what I want to do when I retire. Or maybe not sit, travel and learn languages, because that's even better if it can be immersive.
And I say, don't underestimate culture like music for learning another language.
Very good
For,
point.
for a
Absolutely.
Swede, learning English, all the pop songs.
Yeah. Absolutely, and not having everything dubbed over must be very good for you. You hear it in the original, right? Yeah, that's fantastic.
So, John, which language is next on your priority list?
Well, it has been Japanese for a while, and I did under COVID start to work on that, and I've never gotten myself back because I've never worked on an Asian language. And so that I still threaten this, and the board has approved it. I just have to find time to do it, to go for a month. And I know you can't get far in a month, but I find I need that first initial immersion. It's like diving off the diving board and hitting the pool and feeling the cold water in your face, right? I need that to get me, then I can do it on my own. But I need to start with the full immersion. So that's what I still hope to do. And Japan has just fascinated me as a language and a culture, because when I go there, I'm like, this is so hyper Western in so many ways, and yet so not Western in so many ways. I get up in the morning at 7 a.m. for site visits, and they would say the train is coming at 7:02, and man, it came at 7:02, and everyone's in their black suits, and everything is modern. And I go visit the university, a private university. The first 3 to 4, 5, 6 stories are all very Western. Everyone's in suits. They all speak English. And then you get to go meet the president, the owner of the university, on the top floor, and it opens up these doors into a fog of incense and Chinese characters and philosophy. And the man comes out and he hands me tea, and tells me something poetic about ISEP and our relationship. And I meant to do the same. I'm like, whoa, I've just landed in Japan. The first 3 stories of this building were definitely the West. And here I am at the top floor with the president, and we're in Japan, and that's the experience in that culture all the time. You feel like you're connected to things you understand, and then bam, you're just not. And I love that about that culture. So Japanese would be on my list.
Excellent. Thank you.
So thank you so much, John. Thank you, Anne Charlotte, and thank you, Dimeji, for leading us in this really interesting and fascinating ending to our town hall meeting of 2024. We really appreciate your time and your presence. And I'm going to stop the recording now.
Yeah. Well, one more shout out before you stop the recording. I do have to say, because I'm giving you all a vision of what I've been up to, but you've heard just a little bit from Kristen and Edson and from Robin, but they're doing amazing work. Kristen's been on the road a ton. Edson's been working on all kinds of new marketing ideas and technology, and keeping the technology running, which is probably giving him incredible gray hairs. Robin has wrestled, I think, finally, the new accounting system to the ground. She's had a knockdown, drag out fight with it, and I think she came out winning finally. And it's been a struggle, but you've got it. I mean, she has the budget in a new system. So they've been doing amazing work, and I would just love to give a shout out to the entire executive team for doing amazing work as well.
All right, applause for everybody. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, board members. We will see you in May.
See you all in May. Thank you all.
And see you in